Patrick Jane against Dexter might seem like a close matchup, but only one of them can come out on top, and it's not as even a fight as it might seem at first. We've all seen what Dexter is capable of, and still somehow this debate keeps popping up. So today I'm going over every reason why Dexter versus Patrick Jane isn't even close. First of all, every version of this debate starts the same way, with people arguing about whether Patrick Jane could see through Dexter's whole nice guy act. And I want to get that out of the way immediately, because it's not actually the interesting part of this matchup. Jane wins that, and not narrowly either. He wins it fast and in a way that would make Dexter reasonably nervous. The proof is sitting in the very first thing we ever watch this man do. In The Mentalist, in the very first episode, Jane walks into a scene that everybody in the room has already agreed is a Red John murder. Same signature, same setup, same everything. And Jane looks at it for a moment and tells them it's fake, because the face is painted on the wrong wall.
Stoked to finally see one in the flesh. This isn't Red John. Right.
At a real Red John scene, you open the door, and the face is the first thing that hits you, and the body comes after. Here you see the body first, and then have to go hunting for the face. The order of the reveal is wrong, which means the man who staged it was copying a photograph instead of remembering a feeling. That's it. That's all he needed. Everyone else in that room is trained, experienced, standing in the same doorway, and they're all wrong, and he's right. And it took him less time than it takes to order a coffee. That's not a one-off either. His skill list is kind of unfair. Cold reading, hypnosis, the ability to steer how someone thinks without them noticing, sleight of hand, lockpicking, memory tricks. He reads bodies. He reads rooms. He reads what people accidentally hand him while they're busy feeling clever. Later in that first season, there's an episode where he figures out that one of his own coworkers has been hypnotized by someone else and pulls him out of it. So he can spot when a person's behavior is being run from the outside, which is a very specific and very bad skill to have if you're a man who runs his own personality from the outside. And that's really the problem for Dexter here. Dexter's whole defense is being boring. He's the friendly lab guy who brings donuts and says the right thing at the right time and never gets rattled. That works on cops because cops are looking for nervous. Dexter isn't nervous, so Dexter isn't interesting, so they move on. But Jane isn't looking for nervous. He's looking for the gap between what a person is doing and what a person should be feeling. And Dexter's calm doesn't fill that gap. It is that gap.
Sorry, I'm not the guy you're looking for.
Which is why both fan bases mostly land in the same place on this one, and that basically never happens. Over on the Mentalist side of the internet, you'll find threads where people are pretty confident. Jane clocks the Bay Harbor butcher quickly, and the only real argument is whether he'd bother turning him in. The Dexter side is more split, but even the people arguing for Dexter usually aren't saying Jane misses it. They're saying his flat, controlled behavior gives Jane less to work with than a normal suspect would. And look, I get that take, but I don't think it holds. Jane has spent a whole career sitting across from people with something missing behind the eyes. A man with nothing to hide doesn't rehearse, and Dexter rehearses everything. So fine, Jane wins the read. Now here's the part. Everybody skips. What does he actually walk away with? He walks away with a feeling. A very correct feeling, but a feeling. What Jane gets out of that first conversation is this man is pretending to be a person, and that is a shockingly long way from this man is the Bay Harbor butcher. Those two thoughts are not neighbors. To get from one to the other, Jane needs bodies, he needs the marina, he needs the boat, he needs the slides, he needs some victim with a thread that runs back to a blood spatter guy at Miami Metro. Knowing what's inside, somebody doesn't hand you their crimes. It just tells you where to start digging, and digging is where this whole thing turns. But being right about somebody and being able to touch them are two completely different fights. And Jane has already lost that exact fight before, against a killer who wasn't half as careful as Dexter Morgan. There is one hole in Patrick Jane's entire career. One thing he has never really figured out across 7 seasons and 150-something episodes. And it's not a small crack in an otherwise perfect record. It's the exact hole that Dexter Morgan happens to live in. The show is honest about it too, which I respect because it puts the whole problem on screen in one episode and never really fixes it. In The Mentalist Season 4, Episode 7, Jane figures out that a man named James Panzer is the San Joaquin killer. He is completely right. He is also completely stuck because he cannot build a case that would survive 5 minutes in a courtroom. So what does Jane do? He goes on television, gets Panzer talking, and needles him into trash-talking Red John on air, knowing exactly what Red John does to people who disrespect him. And it works. Panzer dies. Jane solved it by getting one serial killer to take out another one, which is the most ruthless thing that character ever does, and it's also a full confession that his normal toolkit wasn't enough. Now flip that around, because the other side of this coin is even worse for him. Toward the end of season 3, he becomes certain he's found the man who murdered his family, and he shoots him in a food court in front of a crowd, then sits down and calmly waits to be arrested. And then the body gets processed, and the gun Jane expected to find isn't there, and neither is the phone. So now he's a man who killed someone in public and can only explain it by saying he just knew. He was wrong about who it was too. His certainty was real, and it was also useless. And in that case, it was flat out incorrect. That's Jane's pattern. He gets the answer way before he gets the evidence, and sometimes the gap between the two is where he falls in. Now put that pattern in the same city as a man whose entire job was evidence. Because Dexter doesn't just avoid leaving proof, he builds proof that points at other people.
Specialist in blood spatter analysis for the Miami Metro Police Department.
And how long have you been doing blood spatter analysis, Mr. Morgan?
Go back to the 6th episode of the original series where a body from one of his own kills turns up back at the site. There's a kid who saw something, and Miami Metro assigns Dexter to work the scene. His own scene. He looks at the needle mark he made, writes it off as a bug bite, and quietly puts together evidence that points at the victim's husband. He didn't beat the investigation from the outside. He was the investigation. And that isn't some early days trick he grew out of. By the last episode of the original run, he's standing under a security camera, and he tells a killer to his face that he's gonna stab him with a pen. And then he waits. The guy attacks first. Dexter kills him and then acts terrified for the lens. The footage shows a scared man defending himself. His own coworkers watch it, and they buy it. That's a man who saw a camera, understood what a camera can prove, and then wrote the script the camera would record. Then there's the other side of his toolkit, which is just outright framing. He plants evidence to make a homicide captain look like she was setting him up. And it works well enough that he walks.
You son of a bitch. You set me up.
Maria, can I go now?
Years earlier, he takes an inconvenient body and stages it so it looks like the work of a killer the department was already chasing. He knows what a jury sees because he's spent his adult life making the pictures juries look at. So stack those two men next to each other. Jane's weakness is that he arrives at truth without proof. Dexter's specialty is making sure the proof says something other than the truth. That is the single worst possible matchup for Jane's whole approach. And it gets a little funnier when you remember Jane openly can't stand modern forensics. He thinks it's slow and cold and mostly beside the point. That's a fine opinion when you're chasing a guy who panicked and left a hair behind. It is a catastrophic opinion when the man you're chasing spent years producing the forensics for a major city police department. So Jane's stuck. He knows he can't prove it, and every move he's got left is the kind that puts him alone in a room with the guy. Except by the time he gets there, he isn't the one doing the hunting anymore. Here's the thing that ruins almost every version of this argument I've seen. Everyone treats Dexter like a puzzle box sitting on a table. Jane walks around it, pokes at it, thinks about it, and eventually pops it open. The box doesn't do anything. The box just sits there, being a box. And that is completely backwards because the whole reason this character survived 8 seasons is that the second somebody starts circling him, he starts circling back. We don't have to guess how that goes either because the show already ran this exact experiment twice. The first one is Sergeant Dokes. And Dokes is basically the low-budget version of Patrick Jane because he figures Dexter out on instinct alone, way before he has anything you could write down. He just looks at him and knows the friendly thing is a costume. Nobody believes him. Everybody thinks he's got a grudge. So Dokes stops talking about it and starts following him, and he puts a GPS tracker on Dexter's boat, which is the smartest thing anybody in that building ever does.
GPS tap on your boat. Jesus Christ, Morgan.
The boat is the part of Dexter's life nobody else thinks about. And it takes him straight to a cabin out in the Everglades and to a man who is very obviously not on a fishing trip. That's a win. That's a real clean, hard-earned win, and it lasts about a minute. In Season 2, Episode 9, Dokes has a gun on him and puts a bullet through his leg, and Dexter, shot, still gets inside his reach, chokes him out, and the next time we see the man who solved the case, he's locked in a cage in the middle of a swamp. Being right did not save Dokes. Being right is what got him caged. Then there's LaGuerta, who is the careful version. She doesn't chase him alone in the dark. She goes slow, pulls old files, brings in Tom Matthews to work it with her, and builds an actual case, the kind that could have ended everything. And Dexter's answer is to drop evidence that makes it look like she was trying to frame him. So her case doesn't just fail, it makes her look unstable, and she ends up alone with him in a shipping container. 2 different investigators, 2 totally different methods, same ending. And those are just the ones who work for the police.
Jesus fucking Christ, you're the Bay Harbor Butcher.
I really hate that name.
When Miguel Prieto turns on him, Dexter figures out what he's planning, sends him a message that isn't real to move him where he wants him, and puts a needle in him. He then arranges the body so it looks like the work of the killer everyone was already hunting. That's a guy with real power in the city who knew Dexter's secret personally, handled in one night. Even in the animated shorts, there's a killer who studies Dexter's methods and starts copying them, and Dexter figures out he's being watched, then hides under his own plastic and uses himself as bait. The first grab goes badly for him, and he still turns it around. That's him at the beginning of his career, before all the practice, and all of that sits on top of what he does normally, which is honestly the scariest part. Before he ever touches a target, Dexter knows their schedule, their route, their job, their car, where they live, and how they get in. He breaks into their house, he goes through their stuff. He picks a room, seals it, lines it, and lays out his tools. He does that to people who have no idea he exists. He'd get to do all of that to a man who just walked up and introduced himself. Which is exactly what makes this so bad for Jane specifically. Jane's method is to stand directly in front of the suspect and poke him with a stick. He shows up, he's rude, he's charming, he says something impossible to ignore, and then he watches what the person does with it. And that works because normally there is an entire building of armed agents behind him, and a suspect who has no idea how to counter it. Against this man, walking up and poking him isn't a strategy, it's a name tag. It tells Dexter who the threat is, what he looks like, where he works, who he cares about, and roughly how long there is before this becomes a real problem. Jane's greatest strength is that he makes himself impossible to ignore. And the one guy in fiction you least want paying attention to, you is the one who responds to attention by learning your entire life, and everything I just walked you through is Dexter with time to get ready. But the prep work isn't the scary part of this. The scary part is what all that prep is actually building toward, because it's the one room where every single thing Patrick Jane is good at stops working at the same time. Patrick Jane's best weapon is that he gets close. He walks right up to dangerous people, makes himself look harmless and annoying, and lets them believe they're the ones running the situation. Then he takes it apart from the inside. It's brilliant, and it's the reason that show works at all. It's also, against this specific opponent, a loaded gun he's holding backwards. And I don't have to guess about that, because The Mentalist keeps showing us what happens when the trap doesn't hold. At the end of Season 2, Jane gets grabbed by a pair of copycat killers and ends up tied up and helpless, and the only reason he survives is that Red John himself decides to step in.
Do you know who I am?
Yes.
Sit with that for a second. His rescue plan was another serial killer being in a good mood. Then, in Season 3, he gets kidnapped again by someone from an old case, and the team has to sit down and work through a list of everyone he's ever humiliated, which is long, because making enemies is a side effect of how he solves things. Then, there's the fake breakdown, which is his masterpiece. He spends months acting like a broken man to bait out Red John's people, and the plan works exactly how he drew it up. It also ends with him physically taken, held, and threatened with getting parts of him cut off. He won that one, and he still spent the ending of it strapped somewhere with nothing but his mouth. And the clearest one is Season 6, Episode 1, where Jane secretly kills a suspect's gun and then hands himself over as a hostage on purpose, because he already knows the weapon can't fire. Very smart. Extremely Jane. And then the man pulls a second gun that Jane didn't know about and shoots an officer. That's the whole flaw in one scene. Jane's plans assume he's accounted for every physical option in the room, and the second he's wrong about one, the plan doesn't bend, it just stops. Now put Dexter across from that, because Dexter's opening move isn't a conversation, it's a syringe. His routine is a sedative or a chokehold, then restraints, then plastic, then he talks. He trained in grappling for years, and he's used it on people much bigger and much better armed than a consultant in a 3-piece suit. He took down an armed sergeant while bleeding from a gunshot. When Jordan Chase actually got the drop on him, stopped his car, took him at gunpoint, and drove him off, Dexter had a knife hidden on him the whole time and turned the entire thing around. When a man abducted him up in Iron Lake, he got loose and then used his own blood as a trail to lead the guy exactly where he wanted him. That's what I need you to hold on to, because it's the actual answer to this whole matchup. Every single Jane victory in that show requires 4 things. He has to be awake, he has to be able to talk, he has to be able to watch the other person's reaction, and he has to be free to change the plan halfway through. Those 4 things are the machine. Take any one of them away, and he's just a clever guy in a bad situation. Dexter's first move removes all 4 at the same time, and that's not something he'd invent specially for Jane. That's just how he opens. This is a man whose body count sits somewhere north of 150 by the Dexter Wiki's count, and while nobody has ever tallied how many of those got the full sedative and plastic room treatment, the routine is old enough and worn in enough that he doesn't have to think about it anymore. Which is the point. The thing Jane needs most is the thing Dexter takes away first, out of habit, before the target has said one word. So the great Jane conversation still happens. It just happens after. It happens with Jane taped to a table under a plastic sheet with a light in his face, talking to a man who has heard some version of this speech from every person he's ever killed, and who specifically designed his whole method so that this conversation would happen on his schedule instead of theirs. That isn't a negotiation, that's a monologue with an audience of 1. And people online love the idea that Jane talks his way off the table, and to be fair to them, he has done it before. He's been in rooms with people holding guns and calmly walked them down to nothing, but every single one of those worked because the other guy still had a decision left to make, and Jane could feel his way toward it. By the time this particular conversation starts, Dexter has already taken every decision off the table except the one he's about to make himself. Here's the part the Dexter side of this argument always gets too comfortable with. Patrick Jane is not a target. He's not a killer who beat the system on a technicality. He's not somebody's unsolved case, and he doesn't come close to fitting the rules Harry built. And the whole reason those rules exist is that Dexter is not supposed to touch people like that. So the idea that Jane ends up strapped to a table 3 days after they meet is just wrong, and the newest version of this character proves it in the most direct way possible. In the 9th episode of Dexter Resurrection, Angel Batista has it. Not a hunch, not a feeling, the actual answer. He knows Dexter is the Bay Harbor
evidence to prove that my former colleague Dexter Morgan is in fact the Bay Harbor butcher.
And Dexter gets handed the chance to make that problem disappear, with permission, in a room built for exactly that, and he cuts him loose instead. Years of friendship, and one enormous reason to end him. And Dexter still couldn't do it because Batista is a good man, and that apparently still means something. And then Prutter shoots Batista anyway, seconds later. Same room. Which is honestly the single most useful thing in this entire argument because it tells you exactly what Dexter's mercy is worth as a survival plan. Being spared by Dexter Morgan and being safe are not the same sentence. Still, the hesitation itself is real, and Jane would get the benefit of it. Earlier that same season, Dexter grabs a guy who doesn't fit the rules at all, scares the life out of him, and then just lets him walk. So Jane would be carrying an actual shield here, which is that he's a decent man, and Dexter can feel it. That's a bigger opening than people give it credit for. Now here's the other half, and it's the half that decides this. Because in the last episode of Dexter New Blood, Dexter is locked in a cell with everything closing in, and a sergeant named Logan comes over because Dexter asked him for a glass of water.
Hey, Logan, can I get some water? Kind of been doing a lot of talking today.
Logan is completely innocent. Good cop, no blood on him, nothing. And Dexter grabs him through the bars, gets an arm around his throat, kills him on the way out the door, and then squares it with himself using the first rule of the whole thing, which is that not getting caught comes before every other rule. That's the tell. The protection Jane is counting on is real, right up until Dexter believes he's about to lose everything, and then it isn't a rule anymore. It's a suggestion. And that's exactly the position Jane would be putting him in. Jane doesn't quietly watch from a distance and let a suspect relax. Jane escalates. He pushes, he provokes, he makes it personal. He does the thing that forces a reaction. So the version of Jane that Dexter refuses to kill and the version of Jane that makes Dexter feel cornered are the same guy on 2 different days. And Jane gets to day 2 very quickly. He also has a habit of leaning on the people around a suspect, and Dexter has a son, and the moment Harrison enters this in any way, whatever protection Jane had is gone.
Dexter has a son, Harrison Morgan.
I'm familiar with Harrison Morgan.
There's one more thing that could genuinely save him, though, and it's real. Dexter's biggest recurring mistake is that interesting people fascinate him. He met Arthur Mitchell and got curious. He wanted to see the house, the family, how a man like that lived. So he stalled instead of finishing it, and the price of that curiosity was Rita. Jane is the most interesting person Dexter would ever meet. Dexter would absolutely want to keep him around longer than he should, and that delay is the crack Jane needs. So what's the actual winning play? It's boring, and that's the whole problem. Jane tells Lisbon on day 1, he tells Abbott, he puts the evidence somewhere Dexter can't reach in someone else's custody, in another building, in another agency. He never gets in a car alone, he never goes to the marina at night, and he never sets one of his little traps. He lets people with guns and paperwork do the closing. That version of Patrick Jane genuinely wins this because federal surveillance and separate evidence and armed protection all at once is a problem Dexter has never actually had to solve. Dokes came at him basically by himself. LaGuerta did better, she brought Matthews in, and she had uniforms with her when she picked Dexter up. And she still ended up walking into that shipping container with nobody behind her.
Jesus, LaGuerta arrested Morgan.
And that careful version of Patrick Jane barely exists. He does pull it off once, right at the very end when he and Lisbon know a killer's coming, and there's a federal team sitting on the wedding waiting to take him. But even that one started with Jane going on the radio and personally daring the guy to come find him, and the killer still got close enough to walk into the place where Jane was getting married. That's his best behavior. For 7 seasons, the pattern is that he holds the good stuff back, tests it himself, and walks through the door first, while everybody else finds out later. The whole reason we love him is the reason he loses this. And even then, say he does it all perfectly. Say the case is airtight and the badges are coming. Dexter's floor, his absolute worst outcome, is that he walks into a hurricane, fakes his own death, and stops being a person. He's done it. Or he does what he did in that vault, trapped, unarmed, no way out, and reads the room well enough to turn the owner's own files against the woman guarding him, then walks out with his kid. You can beat a man in a courtroom. You can't put handcuffs on someone who decided to stop existing, and that's the ending Jane can't plan for.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Look, there she was. She was always there, right in the middle.
And the point being?
Because that's the real gap here, and everything up to now was just the entire explanation for it. Patrick Jane's entire gift is making a man show you exactly who he is, and Dexter Morgan's entire life is making sure that whoever finds out never gets to say it out loud. If you like this one, there are plenty more breakdowns showing how Dexter outsmarts even experienced killers. Subscribe to check them out now.